Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today. Before the video starts, there's a message as always. If you want to go straight to the stories, then there's timestamps in the description below for that. So for today I just want to share this. When getting better in yourself, whether it's overcoming mental struggles or whatever's going on, you have to remember that life isn't always going to be perfect. And it's not about it being perfect. It's about you and the person that you put forward towards it. There's going to be down days where you do everything right and you still don't feel good in yourself, or you don't feel like you're going where you want to. But understand, this is just a natural part of the process. The most important thing to do is to stay consistent and stay in the fight. It's important to slow your thoughts down sometimes too, because oftentimes you can get really caught up in negative thinking patterns and it can just throw off your whole day. Sometimes you literally have to slow your thoughts down on what you're doing, think calmly, and reassess and stay in the fight. Honestly, I can't emphasize this enough. Remember, life's just one big mental fight, and you have the most power out of everyone to stay on top of this and to control it. I love you and I believe in you, and take care. Make sure you check out my Instagram at Joe the Insomniac and the podcast in the description below. When I was younger, every year for Christmas, I would drive upstate to my aunt's house along a stretch of highway. I can't for the life of me remember the road. All I know is that it runs near Arkin, New York at some point. It's mostly a drive through rural areas with little to no towns nearby. So it's the dead of night, and my groggy self has gotten off a long shift and had to drag myself to my aunt's house since my extended family was expecting me the following morning. Near halfway through the drive, I realise I'm very low on gas. It annoys me. My brother told me he filled it up, but he hasn't. I saw an archaic looking sign for a gas station off the next road. It wasn't an official road sign, literally a pole with a slab of metal attached with gas off the next exit or something. That seemed a little sketchy, but people do the same thing with fruit stands on the highway, so whatever. I pull off of the next exit on some dilapidated country road through dense woods. The whole thing was creepy and surreal. I kept expecting Leatherface to come running at me. Eventually I come to the gas station and realise quickly that it's not been open for years. It was all rusted and the convenience store roof is caving in. The gas pumps had all been taken out as well. I pull over next to it and check my gauge. I would probably only make it another half mile before running out, so I called AAA, and they said they're gonna send a truck. Now the waiting game. I left my engine on because of the headlights, and it's pitch black, and my paranoid self didn't want to be sitting next to an abandoned gas station in the dark for what felt like forever. So most of the wait is actually uneventful, until I sense movement around the side of the old store, where my lights are pointed. I look up and didn't see anything more, so I look back down at my phone. Then, over the sound of the night, I hear someone yell, "Hey buddy, come here," in a demanding tone. I look up, and there's a guy standing by the old store staring down at me, illuminated by my headlights. He looks like a run-of-the-mill homeless guy. I was spooked, and figured that he must have been squatting there watching me. I say, "Yeah, what's up? You got any change?" "Nah, sorry man." I look up at him, and he has this vacant expression. Then I see more movement. There are heads, about 20 or so, peeking around the trees beyond the man I'm talking to. I can't see them clearly, but there are definitely people there. Literally just heads, staring in the direction from around the trees. I then see another guy beginning to walk from around the gas station, so I peel off. I get as far away from that place as I can, and update the AAA on my location. The driver came back over and filled me up. I didn't say anything, but he left, and I want to call the cops. I called the nearest sheriff department. When I get to my aunt's house, they called me back and said they're all gone, but they found a lot of different signs that people have been living there. The whole situation freaks me out, but frankly, I consider myself lucky to be able to even tell this story, knowing that nothing happened to me. My mum was always very cautious of the bad things that could happen to her children. She would take all three of us, my brother, sister and I, to school, all at the same time in the morning, and she works very close to where the school is. I remembered I was begging to bike to school since I got a new bike for my birthday and she agrees. I was in grade 7, so 12 or 13. My school was a 2 to 3 minute drive away and probably a 10-minute bike ride. I was eager to ride my new bike to school as I also had gotten a new helmet and lock as well. School starts at about 9, so I left at 8. I liked to hang out in the yard with my friends before school started, so I would always go earlier. The route to school was pretty much one straight line, and we get into the city. Now it's 8 o'clock in the morning, so it's relatively bright out again. I'm on a well-populated main road. So I'm about halfway to school, and I decide to cross the street, but not at a crosswalk or traffic light, just kind of jaywalk in. I'm looking both ways though, and I noticed a black car pull up to my left near the woods. It's a Honda Civic, and there's 2 young guys in there, well, sort of young, but they've got tinted windows, and I don't think much of it. The only thing that crosses my mind is, maybe I was blocking them from their driveway and continued down. From the corner of my eye though, I saw a man dressed in all black with his hood popped up, hide his face, get out to the driver's side and walk around the back of the car to the passenger side before I realise what's happening. He's opening the passenger door and he's pulling me by the arm off my bike trying to get me in. After what felt like an eternity, it was like every car on the street had disappeared. Any sign of help was gone. I'm on one of the busiest streets in my city and it feels like a graveyard. It really feels like one of them nightmares where you can't actually do anything. You just lay there and suffer until you wake up. Now these things don't really happen in my city, so I'm not really prepared for this. Now, the first thing that comes to my mind is to aim for the nuts. I shifted my weight to my right leg and kick as hard as I possibly can. Landing one kick, I actually hurt my ankle, so I can't imagine how it felt receiving that. I didn't even look before I crossed the street, biking as fast as I can. I remember trying to turn around to get a license plate, but my eyes are very watery from fear. I knew my mum wouldn't have been at work, so I continued biking to school silently crying. I pull into the schoolyard and drop my bike off. I didn't care to lock it or ever ride it anywhere again. My school's front door is locked 24/7, and you had to ring a doorbell to get in. The serenity reminded me that I still had time to play outside before class starts, and that's when I finally speak again. I need to call my mum. I scream and the door opens instantly. I explain what happened to the secretary, then the principal, and my mum and the police. Now, a business across the street had some surveillance footage, but you can only see the bottom 6 inches of the guy's car pulling up, so that was no use. Apparently, the same guy with the same description went on an attempt to kidnap 3 other girls but never got caught. I don't really believe in God, but I do pray that he/whatever it was never successful. Now I'm new to Reddit, but this is my experience. So this happened when I was a lot younger. I want to say freshman in high school, probably like 2008. There used to be this road near where I lived in CA called Croak Road. It was barely a road. No one travelled on it, and it was surrounded by small patches of forest and some abandoned barns and houses. I would typically go there with my friends to skateboard and hang out. This one night, I was hanging out with two of my friends, Lucas and Durain, and somebody wanted to go to Croak Road and hang out since it's creepy. It might sound lame, but we loved exploring like a bunch of 5th graders that weren't really into smoking or anything like that. I asked my 20-year-old brother James if he could drive us down into one of the nature reserves by the road. This specific reserve was larger than the others and had a network of gravel paths leading through it. Basically, we were looking for unexplored territory to hike in. Soon, one particular path we're travelling down becomes so narrow that James thought Explorer couldn't pass through it, so we got out and walked for a while, chatting, having fun. We go through the woods for about an hour until it had gotten relatively dark out and the sun's gone, at which point we turn around and head back to the car. It's now I should mention that despite being near a lot of sub-developments, this patch of forest is huge and rarely visited since it was so easy to get lost in, especially at night. It was a challenge getting the car turned around, but James manages it, and we're going down the road. Durain proposed that we turn down a different path which we had passed by earlier, since we had about another 40 minutes until our parents want us back, and we agree. Down this path was a tiny pond Durain wanted to check out and take pictures at, since he hadn't got the opportunity to go at night. It was slow going since the road was even creepier than the main one we're on, but we turned off Croak Road. Minutes later, we got into a slight argument. Durain was convinced James had taken a wrong turn since we shouldn't have arrived at the pond by now, while James claimed that he had been driving straight the whole time. Eventually we come to a fork in the road that none of us are familiar with. None of us knew which way to go, so we ended up guessing and going left, hoping that both directions would ultimately lead back to the main path. None of us were scared or anything. In fact, we are actually excited and intrigued, driving through seemingly the middle of nowhere at night. It was at this point we rounded a small bend in the road and the headlights fell upon a surreal sight. There's 4 figures emerging from the forest crossing the road wearing what appears to be cloaks. One guy at the back was dragging a large duffel bag. We all froze and stopped mid-conversation, and as soon as our high beams landed on the 4 figures, they freeze too. James pulled up to the left and went around them. Driving past them really felt like an eternity though, because we couldn't have been going over 5 miles per hour due to the condition of the road. Sitting in the passenger seat, I could see them inches behind my window, and they're indeed wearing black robes. I didn't get a good look at the bag, but judging by the way the guy was, something heavy is inside the bag. None of us said a word until the road straightened out, and we're far past those guys. At which point, James mutters, "What the hell was that?" We continued down the road in silence, and I heard Lucas say, "Wow, they're coming back." I twisted around in my chair to see Lucas pointing out the back window. I could barely see anything, but about 100 yards away we saw the beams of 4 flashlights shaking erratically. The guys were without a doubt running after us, all of them screaming. We start to tell James to step on it. The car bounces and shakes uncontrollably as we flew over beams and potholes. Thank God we did manage to get back to the main path. James gunned it down the path until we're popped off by Croak Road and we get the hell out of there. This is the weirdest thing though. The creepiest thing that I realised is none of them had a vehicle, so they must have been about 50 miles away from anything and they were just out there in the woods with that body thing in the bag. We ended up calling the cops, but they can't find anything. I never told my parents about it until writing this. I haven't really shared it with anyone. It's very important you report suspicious people. I still wish to hell to know how they got there, where they were going, and what was in the bag. Though sometimes I think it's better for me not to know. Hey folks, I'm kind of new to this, but this happened just after I went to a Christmas Eve party when everyone goes home and I decide to stay. because my cousin and I were watching a movie. My uncle, who used to walk his dogs in the woods next to a park, went off to take them out. Before this, my aunt told him, "Don't do that, because it's too dark out there," and around 5 a.m. He didn't care. He went off anyway. My aunt was still worried, so I went along with him. Once we're actually there, nothing wrong really seems to happen. My uncle and his dogs are just relaxing, and I don't really pay much attention to the surroundings when suddenly the dogs go still. This wasn't strange. They always do this and stare and bark at animals, but this time it was different. When the dogs got still, my uncle and I noticed that something was wrong. The dog wasn't angry or anything, just kind of nervous and anxious or afraid. One of the dogs, the largest one, was growling and shaking. As my uncle started to get worried about the situation, we heard it. People in the woods. We couldn't actually see how many were there because of the darkness. Now we hear, "We're all gathered here by the blood of we, thee, and thy." As my uncle and I heard that, he yelled for his dogs to follow him out of the woods. As we all left, he turned his back, and we only see a slight movement in the shrubs. Maybe these people were trying to hide. We ended up quickly getting the dogs and getting out of there. We never actually took the time to investigate who they were or what they were doing, but after that happened, my uncle didn't take his dogs near those woods ever again, and is very scared of being out late now. When I was 7 years old, my father took my older brother and I to a cabin in the middle of nowhere as a vacation. We also took our cat with us. Everyone has their own room. I had the room furthest from the other two, positioned right next to where the wood starts. There was a window right next to my bed, and on the right side, and there was a tree right next to it that I remembered getting to climb in the previous day without success. The bedrooms were on the second floor, by the way, and the window didn't have any curtains or blinds to cover it. Now one night, I remembered feeling homesick and unable to sleep. The cats are laying on the bed with me. I was reading comic books at around 2 a.m. when I heard tapping on my window. I assume it's a branch tapping on the window because it's windy, but I hear whispers now. I remember just freezing in my fear, feeling like a bunch of ice water's being poured on me. I could hear whoever it was tapping saying, "Let me in," and my name. "It's cold out here." I just want to cuddle. I was paralyzed by fear. I just lay there, facing away from the window, terrified close to tears. I've honestly never had anything like this before. I was so paralyzed by fear that I just faced away from the window. I knew it wasn't my father. He kept saying that, but it's a lie and it's my imagination. I grabbed my cat, feeling safer with him, my only defense. I couldn't believe this guy had the nerve to call himself my dad. I didn't know who he was or what he wanted. I hear a screeching sound now, like somebody's got a pocket knife against glass. Now the grin disappears on his face and he just looks like he's horrified and absolutely full of rage. At that moment, my father come barreling into my room with his hunting rifle, and as you can imagine, seeing this made him panic and sort of drop backwards. My father just looked at me to make sure I was alright, just as my brother came running in. He wants to catch him, but unfortunately he got away. To this day, I don't think they ever caught the guy. I remember my father filing a police report. Sadly, they never actually found this guy, and he might still be out there to this day. My dad and I went on a hiking trip a few days ago. My dad is a waterfall fanatic. He wants to see as many as possible. So he and I are hiking along a very pretty trail. We're hiking along a river. It's flowing nicely. There's mountains all around us. The trail is weaving around big, beautiful boulders. I'm hiking at most 30 feet ahead of him, looking for a spot to sit down and have picnic lunch on. And as I round a blind curve in the trail, I just freeze. Sitting on a stump maybe 10 feet off to the right is a guy, but he's wearing one of those colourful badger hoodies. With the hoodie pulled up, he's wearing a Halloween style bunny mask. He sees me and stands up right after my dad rounds a corner. We are all three sizing each other up in silence, and my dad addresses him. "What's up, buddy?" The masked man then tips his head as though he's deciding what to do with us. He then finally speaks, saying, "Oh, not much. You aren't the guys I'm waiting for. You have a good day." And then he turns and jogs off quickly. Strapped on his lower back is a large hunting knife and a pistol. We lose sight of him pretty quick. We hadn't seen a soul on the trail all day, and we'd been there for almost 4 hours. Needless to say, we leave the waterfall for another day and turn quick. Once we're off the trail, we report it to the local forest service and police, but they say they can't do much aside from keep an eye out for any suspicious activity. Now, the guy had no backpack or water or anything, which makes me think that he either had it stashed somewhere or was camping nearby. I hate to admit it, but I desperately wanted to ask the guy who he was looking for and why. Let me start by saying that I love camping. Anytime my friends and I come home from college, we loaded up our cooler with beer, grab some gear and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or friends ever wanted to go with me, so I often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day, the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed my gear, hopped in my car I borrowed from a buddy, and drove to a spot that's secluded yet within safety of civilization if I need to get help. Camping also creeps me out though, but that feeling is always outweighed by the joy of it. So I make a little camp and a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much, but I'm enjoying myself reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling that I'm being watched and stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to my right, but see a doe vault from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to camping. I just kept freaking myself out though, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whistling and just enjoying myself. Around 1, I decided to get into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I'd been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars until I passed out. It's around 2 AM. I hear footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I think to myself that it's a deer or some animal, maybe a raccoon, but I'm on guard. About 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open later, and I hear a rubbing sound and the tent fabric being pushed in a bit. I don't know what to do. I'm paralyzed with fear. I desperately wanted to go and get the knife and stab this person, but I think maybe it's one of my buddies messing with me. Suddenly, it stopped. I was starting to feel more secure because daylight's coming in about 2 or 3 hours, but I'm sure as hell not gonna sleep. All of a sudden, it's about 4 o'clock. I realise I should have my boots on in case anything were to happen. After having stayed up and keeping alert for a little longer, my friend's car alarm goes screaming. I sprint out of the tent. I got about 2 steps out before something grabs me around the mouth. I open my mouth to scream, but instead, the person stops me. I've heard that people can perform insane feats of strength with adrenaline rush. In my case, I just clamped down. His finger popped off almost. He screamed and pulled his hand away. He took off, running down the hill and into the opposite direction. I take off. I must have looked ridiculous, but I didn't care. I quickly make it into the car and speed it out of there, calling up my friends, telling them what's happened and the police, and get some real clothing. When the cops get there, they checked it out. The cops went out with a light. They brought me back some of my things that I left there. But what made me most scared is that right next to the tent was a gas can, and lighter fluid had been poured around my tent. The kicker is, they never caught the guy. So somewhere out there is some crazy guy that's looking to make fires in tents with people in them. Growing up, every summer in July and August, my family would get together and camp out for 2 weeks at the White Lake State Park in Tamworth, NH. Some of my best childhood memories were made there, with rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, etc. Now when I was around my late teens, my family stopped gathering together to camp out after my grandpa passed away. One of the last years I was there, this one particular memory always stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 PM at night when I noticed I had a missed call on my cheap little track phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking s'mores and sharing some laughs, so I decided to go and get some privacy to return the call. I then took a long narrow trail that winds in between other campsites that, at the end, leads up to the bathroom. I wasn't going up to the bathroom. I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table to make my call. There was plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground was where I'm going and it's vacant. There was no other campers nearby in that area. It was quiet and dark, so I chose a campsite. I sit down at a table. There's lights from a distance that light up from behind the top of the hill behind me, illuminating my surroundings just a bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation for around 20 minutes. As I'm sitting there, staring straight ahead, I see the silhouette coming down from the road in front of me. The figure is coming towards my direction, where all the empty campsites are. I can see it's a person. It's not that unusual to see people strolling through the campsite for a night walk. The people I see usually have flashlights, so this person doesn't, but I'm not creeped out, just curious. As the person gets closer, I can see the outline better now, and it's a man. I also noticed his pace slows down. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continue conversing on my cell phone. A minute or two passes by now, and now he stopped moving. He's just standing there in the road looking straight into the campsite where I'm at. Now I don't know if he can see me. Oh wait, he can now. He's staring at me. I step back. He was a little heavy and tall. I can make out he's wearing a jacket. I can't see many facial features, but I would guess that I was staring at a man in his late 40s or 50s. Alarm bells are going off in my head now. My mind has turned to mush at this point and I'm frozen. I was no longer listening to what my friend is saying. I just stare off at this guy. He starts moving now. He was tiptoeing towards me, very carefully, like he didn't want to make a sound. He put one foot in front of the other, leaned forward in a slight hunch form. It looked as though he was charging towards me. In that moment, I snapped out of my mind-mushy frozen state and leaped forward off the picnic table and began running through the campsite back towards the trail. Thud, thud, thud. I can hear him getting closer now, leaves scuffling, heavy yet fast footsteps. Footsteps were getting louder and closer. I made it back to that narrow trail. Once he gets close to whereabout I was, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and the sound of someone annoyed that they've tripped or hurt themselves. Most likely he wasn't familiar with the trail like I was. Whatever the reason it was, it causes him to just stop. I don't stop looking back. I just keep running and running until finally I make it back to my family's campsite. When I got back there, they're still having laughs and smiles by the campfire. I break down crying and I'm trembling. I explain what happened, and my aunt woke up and said, "Oh God." He probably thought that he was someone he knew and was doing it as a joke, dismissing me. My cousin saying, "Yeah, he probably stopped running after he realised he didn't know you, idiot." I wish I was taken seriously, but other than that one thing happening, there was no reason for them to really be afraid. My experience makes me think twice about going alone camping now. I always carry pepper spray with me too, and an alarm. I hope I never see that guy again. Now, while I was growing up, my family would visit the same lake every year for every summer weekend. As we got older, we would visit a large rock we called the Cliffs and jump off it. The rock's only about 15 feet tall at the highest point. For the water, that's really deep. When we got older, we would jump in and try and touch the bottom, but we never could. When my brother and I were in our teens, we took our kayaks to the cliff's edge to jump on our own. We jump off several times. We then find a nice cold spot at the very top of the cliffs and chill there for a bit. As we're sitting there, we notice a white shape in the water, floating towards the surface. It's the letter H. Eventually, it sank back into the water and we lose sight. Before we can look away or even say anything else, another shape was floating upwards, the letter E. Eventually, it too sank below, but it was followed by two more letters, L, P. We didn't jump in after that. We stood up without saying a word and left. We never mentioned it to anyone, and I forgot it even happened. Several years ago, I was working as a camp counselor and told this story as a ghost story. I'd almost forgotten about it and texted my brother to see if I hadn't made it up completely. I asked him if he remembered the time we jumped off the cliffs and saw something in the water. He said yes. I asked him what it was and he too said it spelled out help. One of my friends always has these get-rich-quick schemes or shady ways of making money on the side. Now, in one of his more brilliant moves, he decides that he's going to rent a house out near the country line to host illegal poker games in. Yep. Anyway, on this property is probably 4 or 5 acres with this tiny rundown church about 1,000 yards away on the side, and there's a redneck guy who lives on the side in a trailer probably a quarter of a mile or so down the road. However, the property backs up to the woods, and since it's always cheaper than the range, and I and a third friend ask our renter friend if we can go shoot some guns on the property. He obliges us, and we head out there on a Saturday afternoon and find a nice berm at the tree line to shoot into. Now we're just shooting paper targets with pistols, so we're not that far back, and don't need that much room to do so. After a few magazines, we decide to venture deep into the woods to see just how far the property goes. Now we get down to the bottom of the hill and see fluorescent ribbons that the server ties to the trees to mark property lines. We realise that the property is way bigger than we ever thought before. We're already 200 yards into the woods now. Now just as we're remarking how big it is, we see a dead animal about 10 yards away from the property line. Walking up to examine it, we see that it's a goat that's had its head cut off, clearly done by a human. Then we see a severed goat head a little further away. Now the really creepy part to this is that it's not the same goat. There's two separate ones, and clearly due to the decay, it's been multiple days apart. Now if we weren't armed it would have been way scarier, but it's still creepy because I fear humans more than anything in the woods now. Now I say this was out in the country, but it's in South Carolina, so there's really not crazy expanses of wilderness. Being an East Coast state, there's pretty much all settled by people. The thing that gets me now is that there was a serial killer caught not too long ago around the time we were there, and apparently he started on animals too. I've worked for a company who does contract work exclusively for the US Forest Service in surveying areas for invasive plants, and we basically travel all over the forest in SoCal, even in areas that are off limits to the public. I have many stories to share that fell into the category of being creepy. I have my story to tell. So my crew at work is basically between 5 and 6 people every day. The same people for 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. Like I said, we sweep through the forest by combining a search team looking for invasive plants and putting down a GPS tracker on their location to be removed. I remember one day when I started, we came across this abandoned day use area where there had obviously been some sketchy stuff going on. Now we used to park the car in a turnout across from it and eat lunch, and several cars would drive into the area over the curb. Because the main driveway was blocked with a big metal gate, people got out of their cars, some walking their dogs, some taking pictures, some for picnics, and some people just carried stuff and disappeared into the area. For a while, we had kind of skipped over the area because according to my boss, no invasive plants have ever been tracked in the day use area, so we didn't go there. Nevertheless, it was still sketchy as hell. We would constantly drive by it and see people dumping things. What ended up happening was the crew got called to another part of the forest for a while, and we were probably out of that area for a few months, only coming back sporadically. But we drove down that same road every day and still saw cars parked there and stuff being dumped. So one day, my boss tells me that we need to walk the almost 7-mile stretch of road that day. He asks for volunteers to cover the sides of the road which cuts through a narrow canyon, only 500 feet wide. The day use area was on the right side of the road, so I volunteered to go right with my other 2 workers, with plans on checking the area out extensively. We took our tools with us, which consisted of hose, some folding saws and pulaskis, which are basically a two-headed axe with a pick on the end. Additionally, I was wearing my knife on my belt. So we started walking into the day use area, and I'm scanning for all signs of life. There's a bunch of abandoned stuff laying everywhere, like refrigerators, storage shelves, and broken glass everywhere. There's also several holes in the ground that were perfect squares, cut into the concrete, and they gone down pretty far. They weren't that big though, probably 4x4. So we kept walking back, and I see these rags scattered on the ground. Some have red stains on them. They're next to a big pile of dirt that's covered with stones and half a skateboard sticking out of the ground. There's a wooden cross nearby, and I'm thinking, is this some kind of grave? So I call the other guys over, and we read the writing on the skateboard, and it was a burial site for something that was once called a diamond. I couldn't make out the years on it, but the grave's big. One of my co-workers thought it was an animal grave. I chalk it up to being something that a dog owner's left there. We kept pushing through, and I'm seeing tons of invasive plants everywhere. I'm reading off the names to co-workers who's putting them into a GPS unit when we see a building tucked into the corner of the day use area. So we walk back there, and there's a tiny opening between the rocks, barely noticeable from the road, and it turns out to be a whole nother canyon branched off. We check the map and make sure there is a canyon near here where invasive plants could be coming from. The GPS shows nothing. We have to check it now. It's about the size of half a shipping container, clearly abandoned. The door is slightly opened. I reached out with the hoe and pried it open. It's pitch black. My co-worker takes out his phone, and there's some really weird stuff in there. There was tons of weird magazines on the floor, pillows and blankets, as well as children's clothing. I back up and start walking back to the main road. There's clothes everywhere belonging to adults. This is scaring the life out of me. I'm not about to go in there. When I get back in view of the road, there's a truck in the day use area that's not none of ours. I don't see anyone using the picnic areas, and the weird thing is, the truck had driven over the curb to bypass the gate, and was parked in a secluded area. It didn't look like anyone was in the truck or around it, and I stay in the clearing waiting for my co-workers. When we finally got to the spot, I point out the truck to them, and they said he's probably hanging out in the old bathroom building which is off to the side of the road. They wanted to go in and check it out. I sure as hell don't want to leave them and be alone, so I follow. The building was kind of V-shaped, with male and female bathrooms on the end and a storage in the middle. They go into the men's room, whose door had literally been kicked down by someone, and apparently there was tons of illegal magazines all over the floor, tons of weird pictures of things that I'm not even gonna say, with pillows and blankets. There was a small hole that had been cut into the wall leading into the small storage room. It sounded like they were literally gonna try and crawl into the room for the bathroom to check it out. At this point, I was standing outside the building on the other end of the door to the storage room, and I'm not kidding you, I hear the doorknob jiggle. At that moment, my co-workers came running out of the bathroom, and one of them grabs his knife and brings it up. He quickly grabs another tool and bashes the door handle and the area around the door to the storage room. 15 seconds later, we see a man sprint out of the bathroom and run back further into the woods. Apparently, this is what happened. One of my co-workers stuck his head through the cut hole in the men's bathroom. It's pitch black. He uses his phone and sees there's a man there alone in the corner, boxes lined up with pillows and blankets on the floor. It startled him so much that he ran out too, as well as the other guy. We radioed up some of the hotshot firefighters who had a station nearby for support, and they sent a few guys and literally took a chainsaw to the door, set up a floodlight, and the room is filled with boxes and photos of really bad stuff. We told them where the man ran off to into the other building, so they went to check it out as well. Opened the door, floodlights on, and the creepiest thing out of the whole experience was that the building actually went back further into the dirt at the adjacent hills. The firefighters checked their photography maps, and sure enough, there was a bunker, and nobody went further into that place. Now, I've been homeless a lot, and I've lived in some distant families' land where they have an old cabin upon slits. Due to the local woods flooding heavily sometimes, I spend a good amount of time in this old cabin. There's a wood stove and a swing hanging from the porch. I use that as a bed sometimes. Overall, it was an okay place, and it wasn't too far of a drive from town to get food. You just have to tolerate the half-mile walk to your car. So anyway, one day I'm out walking around the woods, and in a smallish clearing in the path, I see easily a good 50 to 60 dead geese. Every one of them is mangled in horrifying ways. Necks ripped off their bodies, blood everywhere, feathers for the life of me, bones sticking out of the dirt. It looks like a genocide. The ground is dry, and there's lots of dust, but I saw no prints, and there was no other evidence of anything ever being there, aside from what I can only assume was some sort of explosion. I also found a torn open old backpack with a great deal of candy wrappers thrown about. Way too mouldy to identify or know anything of. I decide to turn back to see if I can grab a camera when I start hearing this god-awful shrieking sound, as if it was coming from every possible place. I took off pretty fast when it started, and to this day, my best guess is that it's a massive fume of toxins, or maybe it was from some massive animal. I really can't get a rational explanation here, and it really scares me. A mate of mine and his cousin decided to go on a motorbike trip around Australia. Unfortunately, on the second day, the cousin's wallet falls out of his back pocket, and it was only hundreds of kilometers later that he realizes. Now, the two of them were forced to rely on only one guy's money, since all of the bank branches refused to give out money to my cousin with no ID, which of course is in his wallet. Matters were complicated later when they filled up with non-sniffable Opel petrol, which buggered up their engines and required them to pay a mechanic to fix it. The end result was that they had almost no money, and any money left had to be rationed for petrol. They're eating 2-minute noodles for every meal and sleeping rough. In some towns in the middle of nowhere, they would go to the local pub just for warmth and company, but couldn't afford a beer. So one night, they stopped at a town that consisted of a handful of houses, a caravan park, and a hotel. When they went into the hotel, they met all of the locals, including the local cop, and the owner of the caravan park. Mr. Caravan Park started talking with them and was getting pretty chummy because he knew that his was the only place offering accommodation and camping in that area that was legal due to the presence of crocs. Realizing that if they planned on camping illegally, they could get tipped off to the police, they decided to sneak out without anyone realizing and head out of town. They were hoping to find some shelter, but it was featureless red dirt as far as the eye can see. After about 20 minutes, they came to a bridge and hid their bikes under it to set up camp, even though they're in the middle of nowhere. Roads, trains would come by on a regular basis, and were loud enough even from a distance. The next morning, they went back to the pub to get water and noticed some old photos on the wall. One of them featured a very large crocodile. In the background was a bridge that they were sleeping under. I was on summer break and went camping with my friend and his parents. We went to the lake during the day and did the s'mores thing at night. His parents shared a tent while my friend and I had our own. I can't remember where our campsite was, and I'm not really in contact with my friend anymore. But 15 years later, I'm assuming it wasn't the safest place to go camping. Here's why. I woke up sometime in the early morning at like 3 or 4 AM and immediately saw a man's face looking in through the tent that he had unzipped at the door, sticking his head through with this absolutely insane look on his eyes. With wild hair. I'm literally stiff with fear. I can't do anything but look at the man, who's very slowly moving his head from left to right, as if this isn't bad enough. I guess my friend could hear my breathing loudly or something because he woke up too, having the same reaction as me, just laying there looking in terror at this mysterious man. And I'm not certain for how long he was actually sitting there, but it felt like it was hours, moving his head back and forth. At some point, we heard a noise close by. Oh God, there's more, I think to myself, literally shaking. But apparently, it's not with the man. He quickly disappears a couple of minutes later. We got out of our tent and woke up his parents, but the guy was long gone. What's more crazy about this is the guy didn't even blink. He literally just shook his head from left to right, staring at us, shaking. I've never seen anything so terrifying in my life, and I really don't want to again. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 6 and my sister was 11. We were camping with our grandparents on a campground we went to often, in a tent trailer we always used. We had been there for a few nights, having no problems at all. If you're not familiar with a tent trailer, the kind my family owns has 2 queen-size beds that fold outwards off the trailer, and we're somewhat suspended. We have a tarp over our head attached with hooks underneath to the base. Now in the middle of the night when we're all asleep, a man come into our campground and unhooked some of the tarp under my bed. He reaches his hand in and starts feeling around. I woke up to the feeling of someone touching my hair. Assuming it's my sister, I don't react for a few seconds. She suddenly jerks up, and we both realise there's a hand wrapped around her arm, and that a man's whispering, "Shh." Hysterically, we both start screaming for our lives. My sister and I start bending his fingers backwards, hoping to make him stop. My grandpa then wakes up for our screaming and figures out what's happening, and my grandfather furiously ran outside, but no one's there. The man's gone. Now thank God this was our last night there and we were leaving in the morning. Needless to say, we would have left anyway. I'm just so glad that my granddad actually woke up and was able to help us. If it was just us there alone, I would have hated to think of what could have happened. Me and my father always went fishing. Heck, it's something we still do now. We live in the backwoods community, so nature's always around us. I've later moved into the city life, but whenever I'm staying with my mum and dad, I always like to go doing hunting or fishing with my father. Now, from being out in the wilderness for so long, you truly get used to what's around you. My dad, being so seasoned, always had an explanation for something weird that would happen. However, there was one time something happened that was so weird that neither of us could explain it, even to this day. So I was 18 at the time. We were doing some night fishing in a lake, something that I absolutely love to do. We're having a great time, just talking about life and things in general. I was actually planning to move to the city around that time, so we spent a long time talking about that. And my dad was saying that maybe when I'm older I should come back to the forest and get back to nature, but he understood the opportunities that moving out into the city offered me, and I was really excited. Now, as we're saying this, the moon seems to be shining really bright. It was cloud covered at first, so we didn't really see it. As we're sitting there talking, something seems off. We both stop talking at the same time, and I see almost a blue glow on my dad's face. I reach down to see if I have a torch on, and then I notice it. All of the water around us has a very light blue ambient glow, and I'm not kidding you, the entire lake seemed to have this glow to it. Everything around us was silent. I look at my dad, and he's just as scared as I am. We don't say a word, and suddenly, we hear an explosion sound in the sky. I'm terrified. We both jump to the deck, and stay cowering for what feels like an eternity. It's probably only about 10 seconds though. We both slowly raise our heads, and the light's gone, and there's no clouds in the sky. We quickly pull the boat into the harbour and get going home as quick as we possibly can. And to this day, I have no idea what the hell happened. I don't believe in the supernatural or UFOs, but I really think this has to have been something from out of this world. The closest thing I can think is that something carrying some kind of voltage dropped from the sky into the water, explaining the explosion sound, but it doesn't add up. My dad thinks it might have been something extraterrestrial, but I don't know. All I know is that it scared the life out of me, and I've never seen anything like it.
There was something about her. The fact that she was just too nice. To everyone. But that wasn't how she was when she was alone. And do I know this? I watched her. You may think that's pretty creepy, but I don't care. I needed to know what was wrong with her. Everybody could tell how fake she was. And no one dared to investigate. Of course not. She was scary as hell. So anyways, this all started a week and a half after she moved to our school from, what was it she said? California. She moved to Maine from California. As I was saying, when she first moved here, everybody loved her. She's pretty, nice, and everything that makes up the typical popular girl. Another thing that struck me as unusual was that she came right in at the middle of our senior year. I know if my parents ever made me do that, well, it wouldn't work out well for them, to put it one way. Anywho, after about a week, people started noticing things. She noticed that they noticed. She started to try extra hard to fit in, to kiss ass, to make friends and keep them. The problem was, people were starting to fear her. A chill would run down my spine if she even walked by me in the hallway. This was when I started to become interested. One day I decided to follow her home. On her way, I lagged behind, most of the time looking down at my phone, trying not to be obvious. She did look back once. That's when I began to worry. When I looked up from my phone, she'd stopped. She just stood there, facing away. I knew what she was doing. She was waiting. She wanted to figure out for sure if I was following her. So I kneeled down to tie my shoe. My paranoia seemed to be for nothing when I looked closer to see she was on her phone. I felt so stupid. Alright, had to have been about an hour by now. Where the hell was she going? This walk had to be at least a mile or two long. We weren't even close to any neighborhood or any houses for that matter. We finally arrived to her house. It was so far out that it was hard for me to believe that she could find a way back here. Maybe she was on the phone, talking to someone with directions. I hid behind a tree as she let herself into this eerie house, and just watched her. I was worried and paranoid beyond belief by this point. I always listened to my gut. It didn't sound good. I was definitely scared. When I was sure she was in, I made my way slowly over to the house and peeked into the window. What I saw was something I would never forget. She was just sitting there in a small room, with just one single dirty stained mattress in her bra and underwear, smashing her head against the wall for a good 5 to 10 minutes. I wanted to run, but I couldn't look away. When she stopped, she started to sob quietly, then louder and louder, yelling things at herself like, "Stupid, stupid, stupid girl," or, "They know. They all know. Get rid of him." I was confused, frightened, yet still so curious. I should have known to leave now, but I just couldn't bring myself away from it. And she said, "Leave. Leave. Leave. Leave now!" Then she looked up. She stared me dead in the eyes. Her eyes, so black and hollow and evil. I snapped out of it and ran. It was hard to find my way out of the woods, but I just kept running. I didn't sleep for weeks. Every night I would see her cold, dark eyes in my window, just as I looked in hers. I still don't know if she's really there. When I went back to school, there was no sign of her anywhere. I was relieved, but still very confused. I didn't tell anyone. I never will. All I can do is document it. Hope someone else will see it and think twice before you feel the need to investigate the weird kid. Curiosity killed the cat.
I've been a security guard in my company for over 2 years now, but the work my company does is not your typical run-of-the-mill work. To put it simply, my company accepts jobs which no other security company will, including high-risk assignments that often result in death. Let me take it from the top. When I started working here, they had a very long one-on-one with me explaining all the potential dangers I'm facing. They also made me sign an NDA and a bunch of other papers stating that if something were to happen to me, the company is not responsible. They explained that the job is risky but well paid. I had been jobless for a while, so jump at the opportunity regardless of the risks. Unlike most other companies though, they made me read through the entire NDA aloud to make sure that I'm aware of all the rules. Some of the things that I read there made me think initially that it's a joke, but then I see my superior was dead serious. My job would basically be to provide support to the guards at other posts via comms and patrol the perimeter I'm stationed at. Now, my headquarters was located in an office building compound which had multiple companies renting the adjacent buildings. I would mostly work nights, with the occasional mornings, and the rules as follows. I was to do a full sweep of the compound and all offices, save for Building 4, the call centre. I was not to approach Building 4 under any circumstances, no matter what I hear from outside. Even if I saw someone inside from the windows, I do not engage them. When I ask for more details, they don't answer me, saying, if I value my life, then I must obey. Now, people work a normal 9 to 5 in that building, and nothing seems to be wrong during the day. When I ask the employees about it during my morning shifts, so they don't want to know me. For Building 6, the designer company, the rules are even stranger. Here's what the building chief tells me. In Building 6, you may run into someone, a woman to be precise. She's going to try and start a conversation with you, and it's imperative to ignore her at all costs. She's going to try and talk to you, taunt you, but she'll never get in your way. It's an extremely important rule to remember, and I cannot stress this enough. If you see her in the building, don't run. Finish your sweep. Trust me, she'll know. Do the sweep as you normally do. Check every room and quietly exit. Ignore her the entire way. She's going to become increasingly agitated and violent. Tell you something's behind you. Ignore her, unless you want to end up like the last guard, okay? You'll be fine. Now, I've since encountered the woman, and it was a grueling and agonizing experience I don't want to speak about. Another rule I had to remember was not to open the gate between the hours of 22 and 07. The chief said that under no circumstances am I to open the gate. Even if the next guard comes 5 minutes earlier to relieve my duty, it remains shut. That brings me to this experience I had. It was about 6 months after I started working and the sun's already up. I heard knocking on the gate and went out. I saw through the gate the silhouette of my co-worker. "Hey, mind opening the gate," he said. As I approach and put my keys into the hole, my phone starts ringing. I answer it without looking, but when I heard the voice, my blood froze. It's my co-worker. "Hey man, I'm gonna be 30 minutes late today, sorry," and hung up. I realise it's 6:50 AM. I stare at the silhouette on the other side of the gate, who suddenly starts banging on the door, demanding to be let in, stating he lost his cell phone and he was the real co-worker. I now retreat to the guardhouse and wait for what feels like forever, when this banging suddenly starts on the door, demanding to be let in, stating that he lost his cell phone and he was a real co-worker. I retreat to the guardhouse and wait for what seems like forever until it stops. In reality, it only lasted until 7 AM. Those were all the rules I had to follow on my own post, and most of the time it's uneventful. However, I have heard stories from other co-workers. Since I'm in contact with guards at other posts, one of them told me his story. He worked as a guard in a residential building, and one night an old man who lived there called him to come to his apartment. He didn't explain what's wrong, just said go there, so he did. When he reached the apartment, his wife was crying, stating that her husband's dead. The guard tried convincing her that her man was very much alive and had in fact brought him there, but when he turned around, the old man's gone. It was then that he saw the old man's dead body in the chair, near his sobbing wife. He quit the same night. Another creepy thing that happened was on the farmstead which our company has guards on. A guy by the name of Jeff who worked there told me about his own experience which made him run away from his post in the middle of the night. So apparently, the farm was empty at that time since it needed some more staff built first. But his duty was to basically patrol circles around the farm, making sure there's no squatters or vandals. So one night, as he's walking around, he hears someone calling his name in a playful tone. He dismisses it as his imagination at first, but when it reoccurs, he asks who's there, demanding they put their hands in the air. Now I haven't seen this, so I can't guarantee anything, but Jeff says that all of a sudden, a man suddenly rises from the crops, and they just reach his waist, which is technically impossible, because the crops themselves are taller than Jeff, who's pretty tall. But the man grins at Jeff and continues calling his name playfully, as though he's still hiding from him. Needless to say, Jeff didn't exactly stick around to see what the fuss was about. When he reports it to HQ, they said there's sightings of him in the past, always calling out names, but never really doing much harmful. The final thing I'll share with you here is my experience when I was stationed at a post hospital for a month. It was a private clinic. Now my job was basically to monitor the camera feed. Camera 3 was cut off, though I have no idea why. I asked them and they told me to keep it that way and to never turn it on again. They also said that from time to time I may see a person on feed which covered the outside of the security office, and that he would just be standing there facing the door. I was to remain in my office whatever happened and never glance at the door. He would usually disappear after 30 minutes or so. Patrolling was strictly forbidden between 3 to 6 AM. Money is one of the reasons I haven't quit so far, and the dangers aren't that bad if you get used to it and know what you're doing. And plus getting stationed at different posts keeps this job adventurous and dynamic. But I still have no explanation to any of these things to this day. I just pray I'm not clumsy enough to ever find out what's the worst that can come of them. I guess you'll never hear from me if that happens anyway.
There's someone standing at the foot of my bed. Every night for the past week, as my eyelids grow heavy and I slip into unconsciousness, he comes out, his hands grasping the metal railing, rising 1 inch at a time. He peeks out his head first, black and featureless, a pair of cobalt blue eyes set high up where his eyebrows should be. Then out comes his shoulders, and his chest, until he's fully upright. He looks like a store mannequin, sexless, starved. I know I'm sleeping, but my eyes are open and I see him. But I can't bring myself to talk to him or reach out to him. The gaunt man just stands there, his eyes transfixed to mine, his breathing shallow and ragged. On Monday, the gaunt man reached out a thin hand with long fingers and pulls back the sheets covering my legs. He drags his fingers across my heels or up the soles of my feet, leaving long trails of red that stain my sheets. It felt like a nightmare, the kind you can't wake yourself out of. Tuesday, I caught a glimpse of him in my bedroom mirror. His back was the same as his front. His cobalt blue eyes found mine in the dark room and just watched me as I slept. He dragged his fingers across my legs all the way down to my toenails, scratching them. There's always pain in the morning. There's blood on the sheets, scabs on my legs. He loves mirrors. I know this. He likes to look at himself. When he comes out from under the bed. Wednesday, he just stood and stared at his own reflection, as if he were in love with it. His front, though. His front stayed fixed at me. Thursday, his eyes moved, shifted across his face until they were at just the right place. When this was done, he crawled into the bed beneath the covers and lay beside me. The way he felt when my hand brushed his skin, it made me think of rotten shellfish in a freezer drawer. Friday morning he was gone. My feet were a bloody mess. Just trying to stand up felt like a dozen needles running through the soles of my feet. I saw him in the puddle I made on the floor. Don't ask me how I could tell, but he looked like he was smiling. I went to see a doctor about it. He sent me to see a shrink. I've showered 3 times already, but I still smell like rotten shellfish. Friday night, he was leaning over me as I slept. He looks proper now. Bit round in the waist, same as me. Saturday morning, I missed the appointment with the shrink. It's hard to type now that he's in my monitor's reflection. He's dragging his fingers across the back of my hands, up my arms, all the way to my shoulders. I can't see the letters that well for the blood. My eyes are all wrong. He's fading now. But from the creaking of the floorboards in the next room, I know he's in the bed. Don't ask me how I know this. But it's his bed now. He'll be in my rearview mirror. Come Monday, I'll be the one standing behind him as he looks at his reflection in the bathroom stalls. I look at my reflection. My eyes are cobalt blue.
Now this is a personal family story that's never been shared before, but I can't keep it in, it's just too crazy. I mean, so there's been this doll that's been in our family for apparently hundreds of years, but I don't believe that. The thing's got to have been about 100 years old. Now apparently, that doll is haunted by some of the natives that used to live on the land that my family owns. Get this, the story of how they found it is that my grandpa woke up in the night with this urge just to go digging. Never had anything like it before. Literally in the middle of the night, grabs his shovel, and he says that there was almost a voice guiding him there, but it wasn't speaking to him, if that makes sense. He just knew what it meant. So he grabs his shovel and heads out in the dark, with only the moonlight guiding him and the voice. He starts digging away. My nan thinks he's gone crazy. However, he eventually strikes something. We can then see that he struck a box, and what's inside the box, you guessed it, the doll. Now apparently, when he started looking at the doll, he realised something was wrong with it, and immediately dropped it. He ran inside and went to bed again, hoping that maybe, just maybe, it was all a dream. My nan was furious at him for doing so, being a very strong believer in the paranormal. Unfortunately for him, it wasn't a dream, and he woke up the next day with it sitting in the living room. Both of my grandparents were sure that each other had put it there, and didn't say anything about it. Now that's where I come into the story. Apparently, I would wake up when I slept round there, and I would complain of it screaming at me whenever I made eye contact with it. What's worse is my other siblings also reported the same thing. but for some reason my grandpa had an urge that he had to protect it and couldn't get rid of it. That all changed, however, one day when my mum was having tea with them in the living room when she caught eye contact with the doll, and she heard the screaming too. It's like a faint voice in the back of your head that slowly gets louder. That was it. She's had enough of it messing with her children, and my grandpa, for some godforsaken reason, protecting it. She heads outside with simply a lighter and some sticks. She throws it onto a fire and burns it. She then buried the ashes, and years later we sold the home. Now I don't know if that thing's still there, or whether it's actually returned again to haunt the new owners of the home. I know one thing though, I'm glad that my mum was brave enough to deal with it, and that I don't ever have to see that godforsaken doll again or hear the screaming. So by this point, everyone is in no doubt to be fully aware of the Area 51 memes and all the hubbub surrounding them. Apparently, over 1 million people are set to storm the perimeter on September 20th of this year. Should be interesting, but let's be honest for a second. I doubt it's gonna happen. Even if we did, even if by some ridiculous miracle they managed to overwhelm the most powerful military on Earth and infiltrate a top secret base, I don't think they'd be exactly thrilled with the results. I'll just come right out and say I guess Area 51's a red herring. It's a distraction, and pretty much always has been. Nothing out there but sand, reclusive scientists and an old lake. I mean, think about it. If Area 51 is one of the most top secret and covert blacklists in the world, how does everyone know about it? How secret can it be if everyone knows the secret? I mean, for frick's sake, even Obama acknowledges its existence. That's the whole point of it. They want you distracted so you don't look for the others. But why take my word for it? Who am I? I'm just some pleb on the internet that decided to cash in on a trend for some clout perhaps, yeah. But no. That may be who I am now, but I was once a person of particular interest to the United States government. Most people know me as Mr. Blue. It's not my real name, but it's much easier to pronounce. I used to be a pilot. I did that for many years, and I loved every second of it. I tell ya, there's nothing quite like soaring through the skies and breaking the sound barrier for the first time. Yeah, you might crap yourself a little, but hey, that's part of the experience, really. Now, unfortunately, the type of work I did is above the top secret, and for all of our safeties, I cannot go into any more detail of who I am or what I did. One day, however, I was out on a classified reconnaissance mission in a certain area I should not have been. Now I'll apologise here for any vague details of certain things, but you gotta understand, the things I'm about to tell you are beyond top secret. I mean, they'd kill me 10 times over for uttering a word of it. But anyway, the mission's going as planned, when suddenly my instruments start going haywire. Air pressure inside the cabin just plummeted, and the speed and fuel consumption gauges start going crazy. Everything. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. Next thing I know, I see a bright light soar past me at an ungodly speed. The shockwave it produced is so violent that it shredded the whole of my craft in a split second. So I went from casually flying along to suddenly regaining consciousness as I plummeted headfirst towards the ground at terminal velocity. I managed to pull my chute before I splattered, but as I touched down, I almost wished I hadn't. There I was met by an entourage of at least 24 men in winter camo suits and masks. They're all pointing weapons at me and screamed in a language which I recognise as English. I do my best to calm down and appear unthreatening, but that didn't stop them from wrenching me into a pair of handcuffs and hauling me onto their APCs. They began to drive away, and the real severity of the situation hit me. I was not going to be saved. The people I worked for had never said it, but I always known that if you're captured, you're on your own. With that in mind, I had no real incentive to keep my mouth shut once they started the interrogation. It may seem cowardly, but I'm not about to be tortured brutally from a former ally. Yeah, the government says that they don't torture people, but that's what they say. So I told them about who I worked for, what my mission was, why I grew up, all that jazz. It was all fabricated, but they took the bait regardless, thanks to their severe distrust of the Russians at the time. But they were actually pretty cool after that. I mean, they wouldn't leave me in their custody alone, but it was better I was alive than dead for them. They then transported me away from my initial interrogation place into a secure facility nearby. I was blindfolded the whole time. I can now hear rumbling of multiple vehicles, sounds of doors sliding, and the distinct feeling of my stomach dropping. I could tell they've taken me somewhere deep underground. Soon after, I stepped off the elevator and they removed my blindfold. Their leader was a guy with a stern face, a thick black beard and eyes that looked etched onto concrete. He wore a black suit with some symbol upon his heart pocket that I don't recognise. He stepped in front of everyone, outstretched his arms while staring at me. "Welcome to your new home." An ever so slight grin stretches across his face as he says it. I glanced down the dismay grey hallways which seemed stretched out further than I could ever imagine in multiple directions. They led me down some hall on the right, past dozens of locked corridors, and the rooms before ushering me into a cell. My handcuffs were removed soon after, and the door slid shut behind me. The same man who had welcomed me to the facility then approaches the window, pushing the intercom. "Welcome to the corporation, Mr. Blue. I don't believe there's any reason why our time spent together should be unfriendly. I apologize for this, but you must realize that this is a necessary precaution we must take." And I nod at him. "Wonderful. We'll see you for dinner soon. If you require anything, just please notify one of the guards outside of your quarters." And with that, he and his little entourage turned and strolled down the hallway. That was my very first night in the facility, which I eventually came to know as FEZ. I don't think it's an official name, but I heard several personnel at the base refer to that by the acronym over the years. I still don't know what it was for. The best I can come up with is Fortified Experimental Zone. It makes the most sense. All things considered, at first it wasn't actually too bad. The staff are nice, the food is great, and there's plenty of things to see around the base. Now they interviewed me probably 100 times after, and were especially interested in the craft I was piloting. The craft in question was one of our new technologies, but unfortunately it was blew to smithereens by the light. It took years of incarceration there, but eventually the staff came to trust me almost as much as they did their own comrades. We would laugh and joke with one another, and soon we might even be considered friends. I became especially close with one of the scientists named Kevin. Kevin was a smart, comical guy and had quite a lot of things explained to me. He and I would spend countless hours talking. He was my only glimpse into what was happening on the outside world. He'd bring in books and movies for us to enjoy together. He kept me updated on everything, and over the next 30 years, we developed a close friendship that I always treasure. I must have displayed some kind of intellectual potential, because they eventually started asking for my input on various curiosities stationed throughout the base. They only did it because I'd sworn to them complete loyalty that I'd never be allowed to leave the base anyway. The base itself is colossal. They always blindfolded me during transports via any location, but one time I caught a glimpse of the buttons in the elevator. There had to be at least 50 of them. I remembered the first time they showed me one of the lockdown blocks. There were guard posts at every cell. I heard some very strange noises emanating around me as we transversed the halls. I thought for sure that they were about to show me some horrendous beast from the depths of hell, and prepared myself for the according howls of unseen things through the halls. Now the lead scientist rolled back a two-way mirror, and my heart frozen with anticipation. In the cell block in front of us, there's nothing more than a human girl in a grey jumpsuit. She's maybe 5 years old or so, but nothing out of the ordinary. I told the doctor what's going on, and he raises his eyebrows before pressing a button, and I heard the sound of a gas seep into the room. A few tense seconds passed, when the girl suddenly shrieked a little. Her head tilted back, and I saw jagged, needle-like teeth emerge from her mouth. Her jet black eyes then lurched towards us, and she lunges at the window. She struck it hard and fell into the ground, snarling and hissing like some terrible beast. You ever seen anything like that? All I can do is shake my head. I've never seen anything like it before. They found her in the woods outside of Whitehorse with a freshly disemboweled man. She was eating him, and she appeared unaffected by the sub-zero temperatures. I suddenly feel like vomiting, but I said nothing. I only stared back at the unusually gruesome little girl. What the hell is she? Unfortunately, I was never told anything else about her. I doubt the personnel knew much anyways. They came to show me a lot of very strange things over the years. A giant brownish orange-haired primate that walked upright and seemed to respond to facial movements. A humanoid-shaped being that was only detectable via infrared cameras. A golden chest that would instantly kill anything that touched it, and a 10-foot tall creature wrapped in vines that emitted bouts of radiation and blended into the environment with perfect camo. There's a monstrous fish, at least 80 feet in length, frozen in nitrogen. Various apparent creatures that I'm guessing are the results of relentless genetic tempering. I've never seen anything like it. All of the monsteries housed there, and the secrets buried in their possession. They also asked for my advice on certain paradoxical phenomenon that had plagued them as well. They tell me that for decades there had been hundreds of unsolved cases of human disappearances that defied all explanations. Young children were found on cliff edges that they could not have reached, while old and frail people would be discovered dozens of miles away from where they started only hours later. Many not found though. I could almost see the fear from their eyes as they relay case after case of recordings and other things. And it was clear, although not said, that they have no idea what the cause is. Unfortunately, neither do I, as it was the first time I'd ever heard of the bizarre phenomenon. I told them honestly that I didn't believe my former allies were responsible, but I don't know if that made them feel worse or not. Throughout the years there, I had always found one particular thing weird. After all the weird and terrifying things they showed me, there's never a mention of extraterrestrials. That's why everyone thinks these black site facilities are there, but nobody mentioned it. That made me smile a bit when I thought about it, because they had no idea how close they were. The closest thing they had was this weird tentacle creature with a rigid set of teeth in its mouth, almost an eel, but possessed 4 weird eyes in a ring around its head. You'd think it'd live in the water, but it didn't. That was what threw me off about it. It slithered around the ground in a very swift and very unsettling motion. They said its DNA resembled nothing like anything they've ever seen before, much like RNA, hence the reason they believed. But we're not certain of where it come from. Kevin and I got talking back in his quarters one night as the rest of the crew retired for the evening. He shared with me a bit of his brandy, and we were content to chat as though we're friends late into the night. He tells me about himself and things that he's never mentioned before. He showed me his wife and his son that had been taken from him. Kevin admitted that his son died in a car crash years back, and his wife unfortunately died of cancer years later. It broke my heart to hear that, and I felt sorrow for him some 30 years later. Kevin was in his early 50s, but you'd never know it with the enthusiasm in his voice. It was during the conversation, Kevin ended up mentioning something I find interesting. He told me that he believed that if an alien species existed, they're advanced enough to traverse a galactic canopy and reach Earth. Then obviously they're going to be quite intelligent also. He said he didn't believe in any of the Hollywood depictions of doomsday where aliens come to destroy us. He thought they'd be more subtle than that. Think about it. You find some intelligent creatures which present almost no threat to you, and the first thing you're going to do is try and kill it? That'd be a waste, no. And no species that fancies themselves as an advanced being would be so brash. At least I hope they wouldn't. He chuckled slightly and shot me a knowing look mixed with a unique intrigue that glistened in his grey eyes. Even if they thought we were destroying our own planet or something, why do they care? They're trillions of miles away, and there's trillions of other planets in our Milky Way alone. They could pick off any one of them if they wanted resources. I chuckled to myself, almost foreseeing where the conversation's heading. It's not the planets they're after, I replied. Kevin snapped and pointed his finger at me and his face lights up. Exactly. They'd want to study us, learn about us how we do other things. Kevin's hand moves erratically now. They'd probably learn about us, then we'd learn more about ourselves too. I mean, granted, they'd have to be more intelligent. They could learn up close, understand how we work. No need for bloodshed when they could simply, inconspicuously integrate into human culture. They have no doubt mastered the art of altering their biology to disguise themselves. I mean, that's nothing when compared to the tech they use here, you know. He paused from his entranced monologue and wiped off the stream from his glasses. I just sit back, intent to let him continue. As I found it fascinating that he could know so much. Aliens, they're not warlords, they're poets, architects, authors, musicians, beings that wish to create. It is the ultimate calling from the entity so powerful. Kevin took a deep breath and revealed his own explanation. His speech had turned a bit slurred. His eyes are somewhat lazily floating. He then met his eyes in a look that I'd never seen him give before. It was as though he seemed to have lost all sense of formality and ready to propose a question which he had long wanted to ask. "You're not really from Russia, are you?" The sudden accusation caught me off guard. I don't know what to say. You had everyone fooled. I mean, I was too for the longest time. You had a suitable backstory, authentic accent, and the alias you gave us checked out. He paused and clasped his hands in front of him. You look so authentic too, but there was one thing you missed. One thing you can't fake. That night your craft was shot down. What were you doing here, Kevin? And I maintained a prolonged lock of eye contact before I finally responded. Well, reconnaissance. And for the first time in decades, I dropped the Russian accent. It was clear that there was no longer any reason to lie to my friend. And what did you see, Kevin? Staring into my eyes. Beauty, poetry, creatures like us. Kevin just stared at me for the longest time, as though he was there weighing my soul in his mind. I wondered what he planned. Eventually he smiled and rose to make his way to the cell door. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a black steel pistol with a long snout. "Mr. Blue, do you want to go home?" I nodded after pausing for a moment. "I hope your allies can forgive us." Without another word, he flashed his security badge on the locks on the doorway. He mentioned for me to rise and follow, so I do. Kevin glanced back and forth down the hallway, but due to the late hour, no one's around. He and I sprinted down the corridor and onwards to one of the security booths. He flashes his badge as I hid out of sight. He entered his room and I heard noises, like a brief scuffle before two bright flashes ended it. Kevin now re-emerges with wild eyes, beckoning to me to follow. He and I dash down the hallway and reach a massive mineshaft elevator soon after. And now finally, for the first time, I enter without a blindfold. Kevin punches in the security code and powers it up. Security system will be down for a good half hour, but automated distress beacons have already been activated, and that gives us about 8 minutes. Kevin drops the clip from his pistol, popping in a fresh one. I see speckles of blood on his eyes. He's in a frenzy state. "Here, take this." He reaches out his hand and held something which I haven't seen in decades. The old radio from my craft. I took it. We meet eyes at the door to the elevator. It was back to running after that, but after a few minutes of it, we've reached an underground parking facility. Kevin unlocks a nearby vehicle, and the two of us hopped in as he fires it up. The engine roars to life. Kevin and I accelerate through. A moment later, we exit the facility. God, and I see my first vision of the night sky in over 4 decades. There were men stationed at the perimeter gates attempting to stop us, but he don't even flinch. He crashes right through the fence on the perimeter, causing multiple lights to activate in our wake. I hear sirens now and the silhouettes of people dashing. "There's a suit in the back, put it on." I do so, without question, and fit in the snug polyester garment. I covered every square inch of my neck around that thing, and it feels incredibly comfortable. There's a dial on your right side. You can use it to mask your body heat. They're gonna be after you. He tossed a map into my lap and continued barking instructions. "You can contact your friends on that radio, right?" His eyes flashed to me as he slid onto the main road and away from the compound. "Yeah," Kevin nodded. "Make your way north. They won't be expecting that. There's a river up there about 30 miles away from the forest. Once you find it, Head east until you find a small town. Ask the guy at the post office for Mr. White. He's a friend of mine who's agreed to help you. He'll take it from there. I tried to digest the flow of information as best I can to remain confident. It had all happened so suddenly. I stashed you some MREs in that bag. Should last you a good couple of weeks. Kevin then swerved around the corner to reorientate us onto a new dark road. I have an influx of adrenaline. A sudden thought occurred to me. What's gonna happen to you though? Kevin didn't seem to want to acknowledge the question. Forget about it. Just get back to your own people, okay? Behind us is a flurry of lights, suddenly ascending into the night sky. The whirly sound of rotary blades is all I can hear. Ah, I had hoped that I could get you a bit further than this. He suddenly slams on the brakes. My head lurches forward and the car spun back and forth along an icy road. Here, take this too. Handing over the long-barreled pistol. I hesitantly take it. Then our eyes meet for one final time. This is where we say goodbye, Mr. Blue. Why? Why are you doing this for me? Kevin lets out a sigh, staying silent for a moment, and only when the sounds of approaching engines grew louder, he says, You don't belong here. You don't belong in a cage. I don't know where you come from, but I want you to see your loved ones again. I know I can't. His eyes begin to water as he jolted his neck before looking at me one final time. I hope you don't think of us as captors or kidnappers. I hope you see us as you see yourself. I hope you can just understand. A single tear then rolled down his cheeks and I put my hand on his shoulder. I always have and I always will. Thank you, Kevin. I held out my hand and he grabbed it tight as we shared one final moment before I venture into the blizzard. The journey from then on was long and arduous, with me spending weeks trudging through snow and frozen forests. Hounds, men, machines pursue me for days, but somehow I elude them. The terrain is truly brutal, unrelenting, but eventually I managed to find the river which Kevin has mentioned to me. By this point, all of my pursuers had long gone silent, and I followed the river and found the town, and soon after, the man known as Mr. White. He was a kind man, gladly inviting me into his house to avoid the agents. It is there that I've been ever since, awaiting Ali's arrival. They were stunned to hear me again, but not as stunned as I was to find out the radio still works. They weren't entirely sure whether they could trust me anymore, but I didn't give them a choice. I threatened to go public and expose them to the world, and they finally agree, but mention it's months before they can reach me. I expect as much, and thankfully Mr. White allowed me to stay with him and wait for their arrival. I found out soon that my dear friend Kevin, to whom I owe my life and freedom, has been found deceased. The authorities ruled it a suicide, gunshot wounds around the back of the head, but obviously I had my doubts. It truly broke me to learn about one of my true friend's demises, but I knew it was what he expected. I like to think that this is why he chose to do it, and furthermore, it is the reason I'm posting here now. Kevin's legacy deserves to live on, and this is the only way I know how to do it. And with that, we have come full circle to this message you're reading right now to address the original topic. Area 51 is indeed a reuse. Kevin had a lot of power in his previous role and told me about all the operations. The real prize is FEZ, my former prison, somewhere in Alaska, buried beneath mountains of snow. Kevin was a smart, brilliant man. If you've ever managed to make it this far, then I'd like you to think that you're someone like him, brave, curious, with an almost innate sense of wonder that cannot be satisfied. It is my hope that Kevin's ideas will live on through you. My allies would never approve of the message, but that's not the point. The truth is something that all sentient beings should be allowed to perceive, despite how unpleasant it may be. It was Kevin's belief that the beings he knows as aliens are already there, that instead of murdering humans, as is often portrayed in stories, they would blend in, take keen interest in human culture and society, write books and poetry, in the hopes of connecting to something truly extraordinary. If Kevin is right, then maybe one day you even stumble upon such a story yourself. Maybe you'll think that it's nothing more than a work of fiction either. Maybe the author said theoretical story would seem like nothing more than your run-of-the-mill internet user. He probably wouldn't come right out and say it, because that would be entirely too corny. He would probably just leave you the pieces and hope you can put them together. Maybe you are truly like Kevin, drawn to mystery and prepared to entertain the fantastic. Maybe you'll dismiss the implications of the words before you because you don't dare believe in something so outlandish. Because in the end, truth is not the problem, belief is. Maybe someone will understand who, or more importantly, what I really am. Maybe it will be you. Either way, I've been away for a very long time. It's time for me to go home now. Thank you, Kevin. I will always uphold our agreement.